مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. بما أن خطاب حالة الاتحاد هو حدث ضخم، فهو المناسبة الوحيدة التي يحضر فيها الرئيس إلى اجتماع مشترك لمجلسي الشيوخ والنواب، وذلك ليقدم تقريرا عن الوضع العام داخل البلاد وحول العالم. وعادة يشكل هذا الخطاب مناسبة لاحتساب الفضل في كل ما هو إيجابي في أميركا، وفرصة لملام الحزب السياسي الآخر لرفضه التعاون في إيجاد الحلول لكل ما يحدث. في خطاب هذا العام قام الرئيس بخطوة إضافية، فقد شكل خطابه لهذا العام الهجوم الافتتاحي للانتخابات الرئاسية، حيث هاجم الرئيس المتحمس بايدن الرئيس السابق ترامب مرارا، وهو أمر غير معتاد، فالرئيس السابق سيكون منافسا للرئيس الحالي، وهو أمر غير معتاد أيضا. لبحث خطاب حالة الاتحاد والبداية المبكرة لانتخابات نوفمبر المقبل، يسرني أن أستضيف نخبة من المراسلين السياسيين ناومي ليم، أليكس ايزنستاد وجوش كروشاور. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. It's one of the biggest political events of the year. It's not every day that all the congressmen, all the senators gather in one room in the United States Capitol with a gallery filled of guests and VIPs. It's the annual State of the Union address by the President of the United States. And this year, it took on very special significance. We're going to go into all this with Josh Kroshauer, Naomi Lim, and Alex Eisenstadt. Thank you for joining me this morning. So, everyone, why did this year's State of the Union address have such high expectations? Why was it a special event, a little bit different than most of these annual gatherings? Naomi?
Well, I think this State of the Union was particularly important because it basically kicked off the 2024 general election, which is probably one of the longest in modern presidential history. It came just before both President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump were able to secure the delegates they needed to get their respective parties' nomination. And I think that sort of, set the stage for President Joe Biden to come out and not only sort of tout his record, but then also prove to a lot of naysayers or critics, even within his own party, just about his age and whether he has sort of the capabilities, mental acuity for another 4 years in office. So I think that is something that really heightened expectations. And, for the most part, I think that the White House is generally pleased with what President Joe Biden came out. There were obviously a couple of faux pas that we can maybe talk about later, but I think that they were generally pleased. He's not the best public speaker just because he has a stutter, as well as, he is 81. And so there was a lot of preparation involved as well. And I think that they are, happy with the end result.
So, Josh, what were the expectations, and did President Biden meet them?
Well, as far as expectations go, Rob, the biggest question was whether he would have the energy. As Naomi mentioned, he's 81 years old, and there's been a lot of worry in the White House that this president doesn't have the stamina, doesn't stay up late enough, maybe would stumble over his lines, and that's why this State of the Union was, I think, more significant politically than other recent State of the Unions by this president. Under those low expectations, he passed with flying colors. He was very chipper. He was very feisty, attacking Republicans from the get-go, making Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, the Republican Speaker, a little bit uncomfortable, focusing on very poll-tested popular issues, everything from supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression, supporting abortion rights, attacking the political violence that took place on January 6th. This was a political address. You could have seen this speech at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania or Michigan. It was a very partisan address that mentioned Donald Trump, not by name, but by reference. My predecessor was a line that President Biden used on 13 different occasions in the State of the Union. So, a lot of Democrats are feeling relieved. They thought the president did a lot better than expectations. He set up the stakes for the upcoming presidential election. But it was also a very partisan speech, and I don't know how, at a time when a lot of Americans are sick of all the fighting and the partisanship in Washington, I'm not sure if it really moved the needle that significantly in a very partisan and tribal American public.
So, Alex, did the president make any news on either domestic or foreign policy related issues with what he said in the address?
Well, he did make some news in some regards. There was a moment where he called an illegal immigrant. He referred to them as an illegal, which angered some elements of his base. But this was more, as Josh said, this is a very scripted address. It was something that was much more political, something you would see at a national convention than it was about making specific pieces of news. And you're seeing the White House. Biden's already barnstorming the country. You're seeing him now setting up trips for Arizona and Nevada. So he's definitely thinking in terms of politics right now, in terms of putting out an agenda that he thinks he can run on that will both energize his base, which is something that he needs, and start to reach out to some independents as well.
When you look at the screen, Alex, let me stay with you for a minute. When you look at the screen during the State of the Union, you see three people: the president, the vice president, the Speaker of the House. It's an odd moment, an odd tableau. Any observations from that tableau? How did Kamala Harris and Mike Johnson fare quietly in the spotlight?
Yeah, Mike Johnson's pretty new to this, right? A couple months ago, he was sort of more or less a backbench member of the House. So, and all of a sudden now he's sitting behind the president of the State of the Union. You didn't see him go for the theatrics that Nancy Pelosi did a few years ago, where she famously ripped up Donald Trump's speech. But at the same time, you had, Johnson was pretty, he was pretty muted. He was pretty measured in terms of his responses. You did see some eye rolling here and there, but Johnson was trying to get some of his, he urged his members to stay in line, to not shout back at the president. That didn't exactly work, because you did have Marjorie Taylor Greene with shout back at the president in a few instances.
Naomi, Joe Biden made a career and lasted the first couple of years of his presidency trying to reach out across the aisle. Mr. Bipartisan, I can work with Republicans. We can find solutions to our nation's problems. Was that theme evident in this speech?
Well, on paper it was, because part of the platform that he's putting forward is this thing called the unity agenda. A lot of it, however, is sort of policies that aren't favored by Republicans. For example, there were a lot of populist economic policies, increasing taxes, making price caps essentially on more prescription drug prices. So he sort of said that it was about unity. But then on the other hand, as sort of Josh and Alex mentioned, it was a very political speech. I think that, and that was something like the White House kind of encouraged, this idea that Speaker Johnson was asking people like Marjorie Taylor Greene to show decorum was something that the White House actually wasn't relying on. They wanted these like back and call responses with House members and also senators about things like immigration. There was an exchange where the camera caught Senator James Langford, who was one of the key Republican negotiators for the immigration bill, sort of disagreeing with his colleagues about whether some of the Democratic posturing about that bill, whether that was true or not. And at the same time, there was also something that happened last year, which was about sort of entitlement program and entitlement reforms. And that was something where the White House thinks that that's where Joe Biden performs the best. And it's something that they really wanted to put on display so that the Democrats that are, thinking about, and independents that are thinking about potentially staying at home are sort of energized by his presidency.
Any moments of bipartisanship that attracted your attention, Josh, or was it, as you said, a wall-to-wall political speech?
Well, Naomi hit on one of the most notable moments of bipartisanship when Oklahoma Senator James Lankford, who was one of the Republicans negotiating a bipartisan border security and foreign aid bill, said that's true, that the criticisms that Biden had about Republicans not embracing sort of a good compromise that, at least in my memory, was the most conservative bipartisan immigration deal that I can remember that had any chance of getting through Congress. Obviously didn't and won't, but Lankford nodded and agreed with President Biden. It's one of the most conservative Republican lawmakers and the Democratic president. But look, I think Biden was smart politically, Rob, that he focused on a lot of issues that should be bipartisan issues, right? I mean, supporting Ukraine against Russia, that would not, if we were talking about the same topic a year ago, that would have been a 90-10 issue in this country. It's a lot more divisive now within the Republican Party as they become more isolationist. But that's an issue that I think when you look at the polling data, most Americans still support. Opposing political violence. I mean, he put the Republican House Speaker, he was sort of politely clapping but didn't stand up and condemning political violence as Biden was calling to remember what happened on October 7th from the dais. That's a 90-10 issue, and it's one that Republicans, I think we're in a little bit of an awkward position vis-a-vis Donald Trump and vis-a-vis the presidential politics. So I think that it was smart. The speech was crafted in a very savvy way by the White House in tagging issues that are popular with Republicans and Democrats across the country, even if a sizable number of Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill are divided on some of those issues.
Fair enough. Alex, the flash polls after the event showed a substantial bump for the president. Is it real? Is it enough? Did he put to rest all the chatter about him being too old to run for president again?
You know, momentarily, I think he definitely calmed some Democratic nerves that maybe he lacked some of the energy that he needs to run again. There was a lot of Democratic bedwetting in the weeks leading up to the State of the Union, with a lot of Democrats worrying that he wouldn't be able to make it through the election, that maybe he should be subbed out on the ticket. At least the speech calmed some of those nerves because he was able to project kind of a fiery demeanor, and that's at least temporarily mollified a lot of Democrats, calmed a lot of nerves among Democrats who were concerned about that. That was a big part of what Biden was trying to do here. It wasn't just trying to reach out to those in the middle, trying to reach out to independents and maybe some moderate Republicans who don't like Trump, even though he was definitely trying to do that. He was also trying to calm the fears of the Democratic base.
All right. Well, we're going to see how our translators deal with bedwetting, and then we're going to come back after the break, and we're going to look at the Republican response and more generally how Republicans across the country reacted to the president's speech. And now that our campaign is off to the races, we'll do that in just a moment. Again, my guests today include Naomi Lim. Naomi is White House reporter at the Washington Examiner. She previously reported on crime and politics for News Corp in her native Australia. Also with us is Alex Eisenstadt. Alex is a politics reporter for Politico, an online platform that is all politics all the time. He has spent this election season closely covering the Trump presidential campaign. And with us is Josh Kraushaar. Josh is editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. Previously, he was managing editor for political coverage at the National Journal, executive editor of Hotline, and a political correspondent at Politico. All right, Josh, let's start with you. Before we turn to the Republicans, what does President Biden now need to do to build on this apparent success in the State of the Union address to convince America over the next 6 months that he is up to the job, and to try to focus on the achievements of his administration rather than whatever foibles people may accuse him of.
He has to show, not just tell. It's one thing to have a speech in prime time with a lot of Americans watching. That was a good step from this administration. But look, he's pairing the State of the Union address with extensive travel across the country in states that are going to decide the next presidential election. He's in Michigan this week. He was in New Hampshire. There are a whole lot of other battleground states that the president is going to be traveling to, pitching his message economically and on all the other issues that he brought up during the State of the Union. The challenge, though, Rob, is that Americans are very skeptical that he has the ability to serve out another 4-year term. If you look at the general gist of where all the national public opinion surveys are in this country, almost 70-80% of Americans, including a majority of Democrats, are skeptical about his ability to serve out that 4-year term. He'd be 86 years old at the end of a second term. And that's one thing he's got to show a lot of. He's got to show that he has the energy. And if he doesn't, I think that skepticism is only going to be accentuated.
All right, Alex, let's turn to the Republican response. I have to say it was one of the oddest in memory. Who is Katie Britt, and why was she chosen to deliver the official Republican response? What was her theme?
Katie Britt is a first-term Republican senator from Alabama. She was elected about a year and a half ago. She was selected because she is someone who is telegenic. She's someone who could appeal potentially to women. She's someone who could appeal to potentially suburbanites. And those are demographics that Republicans will need to win, or at least make inroads in the 2024 election. They've lost a lot of ground with those demographics during the Trump years. And so Katie Britt was seen as potentially a good voice for the party to have in its State of the Union response. Now, it's traditionally a very hard platform, the State of the Union response. It has not gone well for a lot of people in recent years who have tried to give that State of the Union response. But Katie Britt's was probably one of the most criticized State of the Union responses in recent history, if not the most criticized ever. She was parodied on Saturday Night Live. There were questions that were raised afterwards about whether she somehow exaggerated or embellished a story regarding an illegal immigrant. There was a lot of criticism about whether she appeared as unnatural. She appeared to speak differently in terms of her presentation in the response than she does when she speaks at other events. And so it was pretty widely panned, and it's something that is going to potentially color and shape Katie Britt's future, because she's someone who is really seen as a rising star in the party. She was even mentioned as a potential VP candidate for Donald Trump.
And so, Naomi, we'll move on from Senator Britt. More generally and substantively, what's the main Republican line of criticism of how Joe Biden performed at the State of the Union?
I mean, I think this is a criticism that we've picked up on throughout this show, but just the partisanship of it. I think that's something that Republicans have criticized Biden for his entire administration, sort of being this unifying force, as he sort of said during his 2020 election, and something that he wants to sort of bring into the 2024 election, particularly with former President Donald Trump sort of being this divisive figure still. And I think that that's something that they've really latched on. The other thing that I thought was interesting that Alex didn't mention about the senator is that she's from Alabama, and that was where we've had the state Supreme Court decision about IVF, and that's something that the Biden administration, as well as Democrats up and down the ticket, have really latched on this idea of not only sort of like the democracy freedom, like we spoke about with Russia and Ukraine, but this reproductive freedom. And we're going to see that now continue. And it's something that Republicans are grappling with, particularly now that people like Trump are maybe sort of talking about a 15-week abortion ban as opposed to something a little bit more stringent. And so I think that's something that they will contend with, as you sort of said, before November.
And just for our viewers, IVF is in vitro fertilization, and Alabama decision on whether this comes under the rubric of perhaps illegal abortion if things go wrong with IVF. So Josh, ultimately, the election may come down to the face-off between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in a series of debates in autumn when they go face-to-face. Do we have any hint of how President Biden may approach that from this extended primetime look at him at the State of the Union address?
If we have debates, I'm not 100% sure there will be debates as we've had in the past, but if there are debates, I think you'll see a similarly feisty president trying to kind of hit Donald Trump's most significant vulnerabilities. January 6th, abortion policy, where even Trump himself has sort of been a little careful to not embrace the Republican Party position, embracing some of the, or at least embracing some of the laws in states that have overturned abortion rights. But look, I think the big question is, are there going to be debates? And we saw from 2020, when we had the last Biden-Trump debate, that it was Biden sort of just letting Trump self-immolate, letting Trump kind of undermine his own position, because Trump ended up being so aggressive and so angry, frankly, at those debates, that it wasn't really Biden's performance. We remember it's Trump's behavior at those debates.
Okay, there's a question I want to ask all of you, which I'm now asking a lot of my guests. When you look through the lens of the State of the Union, when you look at where this election is now, about 6 months before the vote, do you view this as an election focused on the base, get out the vote of my hardcore supporters, or an election focused on the undecided, those 10% who may or may not decide to go this way or that way? Are the candidates most likely to focus their energy on stirring up their supporters, or at appealing to that perhaps movable middle? Do we have any glimpse of that from what happened at the State of the Union? Alex?
I think there's two different answers. I think Trump has already locked in his base. He doesn't have much more that he needs to do with that. He's got to win over a few Haley supporters, but the Republican base is pretty locked in for Donald Trump. For Biden, he's got some work to do with his base, especially some younger people, Democratic activists, more on the liberal side of things who don't like the position he's taken on Israel, and other Democrats who are concerned that he's just not up to it to run for another term.
So you think it's for Biden, he has to work more on his base. Naomi?
Well, I'm not quite sure how many undecideds there are out there in the American electorate. I mean, maybe there are people that are undecided about whether they want to vote at all, which is something that I think, particularly Democrats, as Alex alluded to, with this enthusiasm gap that President Joe Biden has. I think that's something that they really have to address, particularly when we see third-party candidates like a Robert Kennedy Jr. get ballot access in a lot of these battleground states that we've mentioned.
All right, well, we're going to leave it there because we have 6 months countdown. The race is on. Delighted to welcome Josh Kraushaar, Naomi Lim, and Alex Eisenstadt to help explain the State of the Union and the race that is now underway. Thank you for joining me on داخل واشنطن. وصلنا إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كانت لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول حلقة اليوم، وخاصة بما يتعلق بأعمار المرشحين للرئاسة في السياسة الأمريكية اليوم، أرجو التواصل معي على تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو مراسلتي مباشرة @RobSatloff. أراكم في الأسبوع القادم، وحتى ذلك حين شكرا وإلى اللقاء.